Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Electric Wire podcast. I'm Kristin Gilkes. I am the Executive Director of the Customers First Coalition. Customers First is bringing you a series of 6 podcasts as a part of our Energy Innovation series. We hit pause right at the start of coronavirus. We had been recording in person, and now it seems like everyone's really comfortable with this Zoom format and we can get back into podcasting. So this is actually episode number 4 of our podcast series. We are going to be discussing wind in Wisconsin. I want to give a shout out to the members of the Customers First Coalition for supporting our podcast series. Our members are the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin, the Dairyland Power Cooperative, the IBEW 2150, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, Renew Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Electric Cooperative Association, and WPPI Energy. We have an incredible lineup today. We are speaking with Scott Coenen of the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum. We do a little bit of level setting on wind and some of the more political issues with Scott. And then we go into an interview with Brian Rood and Jennifer Shilling of Dairyland Power Cooperative. Brian is actually retiring from Dairyland this year at the end of the month, actually. And Jennifer has started at Dairyland, and she will actually be representing Dairyland on the Customers First Coalition Board of Directors now. So we're sad to see Brian go, but really excited about the addition of Jennifer to our board. I think that's a really good interview. You're going to like it. Honestly, both the interviews are really good. I wanted to sort of level set a little bit more before we get started. It's actually American Wind Week. And since we're talking about wind today, I thought it was important to talk about some of the resources where you can learn more about wind. I learned it was American Wind Week by following the American Wind Energy Association, AWEA, on Twitter. You can follow them at AWEA. And the hashtag American Wind Week has some good resources linked. There was one graphic that I saw, and I just thought I'd read a couple of the facts to you. Wind is now America's #1 renewable energy source. 7% of US electricity is generated by wind. That could power 32 million homes. And the US wind industry directly employs 120,000 workers. So those are some pretty impressive statistics, if you ask me. I also wanted to reference a document that is available on the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin's website. It is the Draft Strategic Energy Assessment covering the years 2020 to 2026. Public comments are being accepted on this document until August 14th of 2020. But I just wanted to read for you a couple of sections from there. The primary driver for renewable resource development during the past decade has been compliance with Wisconsin's Renewable Portfolio Standard law. Providers have met the Renewable Portfolio Standard requirement to provide at least 10% of electricity generation through renewable resources each year since 2013. And wind has been primarily received through the regional transmission system to meet these goals. Now, and I feel like this is worth emphasizing, declining costs, environmental benefits, and customer interest in zero carbon energy are beginning to drive increased renewable deployment above RPS requirements. So those are kind of the factors, especially I think declining costs, that are making wind even more accessible. The cost has come down dramatically over the past decade, I think close to 70%. So we're really looking at a different situation now than we had been even just a couple of years ago. The other statistic I wanted to point out from the Strategic Energy Assessment is that wind energy accounted for nearly 2/3 of total renewable energy generation serving Wisconsin customers. Most of that wind energy is supplied through the transmission system from out-of-state facilities located west of Wisconsin, where more consistently windy weather conditions support more cost-effective generation. That is one of the topics we discuss with Scott. And so I just wanted to let you know what it says there in the Strategic Energy Assessment, which again, you can find on the Public Service Commission's website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the interviews here with Scott Coenen, and then later with Brian Rood and Jennifer Shilling. Thanks for listening, everybody. All right, I am pleased to be joined today by Scott Coenen of the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum. Thank you so much for being with us today, Scott. How are you? How are you surviving all this?
Not too bad so far, Kristin. I appreciate you guys having me in to talk a little bit about this stuff. I kind of been following the show. It's been good conversation. I think it's awesome to have kind of the Wisconsin focus on some of these issues. So I'm really excited to get into it.
Absolutely, and that's kind of your mission, is this Wisconsin focus on clean energy issues. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you started in your role and what your organization has been doing?
Sure. So I kind of come from similar to a lot of people I think that have kind of been on your podcast. I come from a political policy background a little bit, not solely energy, although I've always kind of had an interest in it personally. But I kind of started 10 years ago working in state level Republican politics, conservative politics. Kind of done it all. I worked in the state capitol in a policy role. I've run campaigns across the state, done a lot of stuff like that. But about 2.5, 3 years ago, I kind of got a little tired of that and decided to hop out and start Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum. That's our 501c3. And our goal is probably going to be familiar to a lot of people that are listening to the podcast. We want to take a new look at renewables, new technologies in energy like electric vehicles, battery storage, things that have traditionally, I think, been a little bit one-sided in passion on the political sphere. Kind of try and take a new, fresh look at it from a conservative perspective. Try and bring a free market voice to that discussion. But also, maybe try and educate and break down some of the skepticism that's been traditionally in this sphere. So we've been at that for about 2.5, 3 years, and I think we've had some good success so far working with you guys and working with a lot of other stakeholders in Wisconsin. I think we've successfully kind of elevated the discussion over this stuff a little bit more, both from a policy sense, but also just trying to educate people what's changing in energy markets, what's actually happening in Wisconsin. So it's been exciting. Personally, I'm passionate about this stuff. I really think it's awesome. There's some exciting things happening. So it's been really cool.
Awesome. So when you think of your excitement for your job and some of the successes that you've had, are there projects that come to mind, or different ways you look at it and say, that went really well, and I think things are changing? Do you have like benchmarks you're looking back at?
Yeah, that's a tough. Everything in politics, there is no benchmark, right?
Yeah.
There's never really a deliverable, right, for anybody that works in politics. But I think, yeah, right. It's hard to gauge. Did we build that building, right? But I think that we've been really, really successful talking to a lot of state level conservative leaders about this stuff, about the potential. I know we're here kind of to talk specifically for Wind Week, American Wind Week. The potential over some of these renewable technologies, it's huge on the economic side for Wisconsin. And I think we've had a lot of success kind of what I would term is like demystifying the messaging around this. How do as a Republican or a conservative, somebody who's not passionate really maybe about climate change or some of the environmental benefits, how can I talk positively about this stuff? What is the message? I think we've been really successful at finally, driving that across to people who maybe have been looking for an in on this issue sometimes. I think that's our first step, right? How do you talk about it, period?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for sort of the outdoorsmen and women, obviously, who just care about the environment and whether they lean Republican or whether they lean Democratic, like you just care about the outdoors and care about clean water and clean air. And in that way, I don't think it needs to be a partisan issue. And I truly wish that it weren't. So
yeah, I've talked with people before. I kind of characterize it as like, I come from a Fox News family, right?
Oh yeah, I
talking to people. That. Yeah, maybe you guys are a CNN family. We're a Fox News, but like the way we talk about issues doesn't have to stay the same forever and ever and ever in perpetuity, right? I mean, sometimes I get frustrated, and maybe, Kristin, you and I are kind of in a similar generation, I get frustrated. I feel like we've been having the same discussions for like 20 years now. Like we haven't advanced at all or changed what we think about anything. And we got to break out of that at some point. And that's why I really hope, we've had a lot of luck talking to younger folks too. Obviously, I think, again, not to be too political, but on the conservative side, especially, I think the younger generation is looking to say something different about this stuff too. And that's been an exciting thing for us to kind of tap into that energy a little bit.
Yeah. And especially as sort of like facts change and costs truly have come down, making so many of these new renewable energy technologies really cost competitive. I think the conversation absolutely must change because we're just dealing with a different set of facts than we were 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, I always lead out talking to organizations across the state. I tell them I have been arguing against wind energy for 10 years. Like I have made all the arguments that I think
had been.
Yes. I've made, I'm an economics guy. I am kind of a numbers and data guy. So, the argument, this stuff wasn't ready for prime time. It was too expensive. You needed tax credits or inefficient government mandates to make it work. All that stuff, I think those were correct arguments for a long time. But you know what? I can admit when the facts change at the ground, and now they're not correct. Cost competitive and the economics behind this stuff, it flips the issue really on its head entirely. That's something we need to confront. Let's just talk about that.
Let's switch gears and just kind of talk specifically about wind. Mm-hmm. What is the landscape for wind in Wisconsin now as we sit here in 2020?
So I'm sure, again, listeners will know this. It's Wind Week. We are maybe in one of the most difficult states in the country to site and build wind. We have a really tough time doing it in Wisconsin. For probably about the last 10 years, give or take, there's really been nothing as far as wind development goes in the state. The 99 megawatt project came online, Quilt Block down in Lafayette County from EDP Renewables. That's the most recent addition to Wisconsin's wind portfolio. But I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 or 700 megawatts of installed wind total across the state, which is something like 2.5% of total production, a pretty small percentage, especially if you look over the border in Iowa. They're at 42% of their energy generation from wind right now as we speak. Minnesota is somewhere approaching 20-25% now. That we're a little bit behind, and there are a couple of reasons for that. But I think the main reason, honestly, for the big challenge for development in Wisconsin right now is local opposition. It's really difficult to get around kind of the homeowner and the land situation that we have in Wisconsin. I tell people often, if I'm a wind developer and I want to go to the Dakotas or Western Minnesota or even places in Iowa and, place 25 wind turbines, 100, 150 megawatt projects, something like that, I have to deal with maybe one or two landowners in those states, right? Really big ranches or really large plots of land. In Wisconsin here, you're going to deal with 40 different landowners, right? And people that have moved out to the country and bought a 2-acre plot that do not want to look at wind turbines and, that kind of thing. So the profile is a little bit different in Wisconsin. However, if you look at the kind of the MISO queue in Wisconsin, over the next 5 years, give or take, 5 to 10 years, there is something like in the neighborhood of another 11 to 1,200 megawatts of wind that is planned right now. Now, certainly not all of that will be built, but wind developers are starting to take a look at Wisconsin again.
There are some differences between just the wind profiles in Wisconsin and Iowa, Minnesota, the Dakotas, but there's also pricing differences, right? So when you cite something out there, you're not necessarily close to a population center. So are there advantages to building wind here in Wisconsin, cost-wise?
I think that there are advantages transmission-wise. Actually, we've kind of, everybody's gone through the fight with Cardinal Hickory Creek, and we're all kind of aware that there's this huge build out of wind in the middle of the country. The Dakotas, again, western Minnesota, all the way down to like Texas. But they're increasingly, I think the big challenge is going to be they're not necessarily running out of space. There's a lot of space there. There's a lot of land there, but they're running out of pipeline capacity to ship those electrons east, right? And that's going to be, I think that's going to be really, really difficult to get over. Because if there's one thing I think people hate more than actually siting wind turbines in their backyard, it's siting a power line in their backyard. People do not like that at all, as we've seen. So I think actually, there's going to be an advantage for wind developers to start to look a little bit more east and a little bit closer to population centers, because they're going to start running out of wires to run their electrons on.
Sure. What are there cost differences between like local distributed wind and utility scale wind?
Yeah. So wind in particular, not to get too far into solar, but obviously solar panels really scale all the way up to 1 million panels, or scale down to 1 or 2 panels on your roof. Wind doesn't quite do that, I don't think, as well. It's becoming very, very cheap, right, at that utility scale big level, and there are a couple of reasons for that. Turbines are getting taller. The blade length is widening, right? Essentially, they're getting taller and they're getting bigger to grab a higher level of wind and a more what's the word for it? A more reliable stream of wind higher up.
Mm-hmm.
So turbines are actually getting bigger, and that's part of one of the reasons that they've gotten a little bit more efficient and a little cheaper. So kind of downscale wind is not quite there yet, at least.
So do you think that there will be more reliance on the part of Wisconsin utilities using utility scale wind resources as many of them move towards their net zero carbon goals? I know that there are some wind projects cited out of state that are already benefiting Wisconsin ratepayers. Do you think you'll see more of that, or where do you think the next generation of wind will be cited?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we can cite it in state, right? I want the development benefits. I want the infrastructure investment. I want the permanent jobs. The tax benefits of this stuff to local rural communities. I want this stuff to be cited in Wisconsin because it's just better for our local communities if it is. Mm-hmm. However, I recognize it may at a certain point be easier to buy wind from Southern Illinois, or again from Iowa, to buy projects and again ship those electrons into Wisconsin. I'm not smart enough to be able to answer that. However, from an advocacy point of view, it would just be better to cite this stuff in state. Wisconsin's real opportunity here is to stop shipping money outstate for our energy needs and start to reshore it back into our state. That's the huge opportunity for us. And if we start shipping wind energy in from other states, we're kind of essentially doing the same thing that we do with coal and natural gas and some of the other traditional fossil fuels. There's no opportunity in that. So from an advocacy point of view, man, I really want to build this stuff in state, but recognize there are limitations to it. I think Kristin, one of the as we look forward, I've had conversations in the past with folks that are really, really interested in the Great Lakes, in offshore wind.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's not something that we've done in the United States yet. There's a potential project in Ohio that's gone through the ringer for a couple of years that might be kind of breaking the ice on it. The East Coast has been talking about doing this for a long time. However, they still have not put anything up yet. Europe is a lot further ahead of us on offshore wind, but the price of offshore wind is kind of tracking wind and solar, right? Just that arc down. So as offshore wind becomes more, economical to build, the Great Lakes are a huge, huge resource for us. Could be really, really big. And Wisconsin in particular, I mean, if we could service, build, and continue to maintain those kind of offshore wind turbines, we're talking about a whole lot of jobs along, along Lake Michigan coast that, could be really, really huge for economic development. So I think there are some opportunities even offshore that could be big for Wisconsin going forward.
I saw you sent out an email a while ago talking about some of these issues that are out there with recycling the wind turbine blades. Is there anything that you want to get out there on that? Is there progress being made, and how does that compare to sort of the environmental impact of fossil fuel industries?
Yeah. So this is where I think our organization, this is where I think we're really valuable. Sometimes I think folks may be left of center, or people who are really, really passionate about renewables and this energy transition tend to dismiss legitimate concerns over wind and solar and batteries and electric vehicles, and tend to kind of, put rose-colored glasses on when looking at these technologies. We truly treat this stuff as they're disruptive technologies, right? They are new, industrial scale entrants into the market. With any disruptive technology, there are huge challenges to them. I mean, there are problems that come with using this stuff at a large scale. So recycling of wind turbine blades is absolutely a big problem. Like, the industry needs to figure out some solutions for it. It's important, I think, for a lot of people to recognize, I talk to a lot, again, to conservative audiences who are skeptical about this stuff. I think sometimes conservatives spend too much time talking about all of the problems, that come with some of these technologies, and they tend to use, well, you can't recycle the wind turbine blades as an excuse to just not use the technology at all, right? Or the technology won't work because X, Y, and Z. I think that we should recognize the problems, but work really hard to go and find solutions to them. I mean, again, I go back to, the Model T example. There were huge problems when the automobile first hit the road. I mean, but that's not an excuse for us. I'm sure people, what are you going to do when the car breaks down? Or, it's not as reliable as the horse and buggy. I mean, we had problems to all new technologies, but we find solutions to them. And I truly believe the wind turbine blade recycling, there are businesses starting down south. Again, Texas is a leader on this. They're essentially figuring out how to cut these wind turbine blades up into manageable pieces, and it's just fiberglass. And we've been recycling fiberglass in other forms for a long time. So it's just a matter of applying what we're kind of already doing to this new industry, right? Just to apply it and figure out what the business model looks like. So, to a lot of folks, I see it circulate on social media a lot. The picture of wind turbine blades in a landfill somewhere, and that's horrible, and that's why green energy sucks and we can't do it. And that's not really true anymore. It's not the whole story, right? We need to figure out, there are problems here certainly, but I mean, there are a lot of people working on solutions towards it.
Mm-hmm. I was recently reading about a project in Denmark where it calls for utility scale wind mixed with solar, hydrogen, but also storage. And they mentioned that the future of wind really is going to be these utility scale projects paired with utility scale storage. Have you heard of projects being proposed like that? And do you have any thoughts you want to share on that?
Yeah, we're doing it right now. Actually, we're doing, well, developers are doing it in Wisconsin right now. It's exciting because I think this has been the holy grail of renewables, right? And that kind of goes, your question goes back to, again, one of the big drawbacks that we need to recognize: the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. Those are absolutely true criticisms of renewables. So the variable nature of renewable energy inherently is a limiting factor. If you can add storage, generate energy in the middle of the day and use it 24/7, I mean, it firms up that resource, and it really solves so many problems for the grid, right? So there are projects, especially on the solar side right now in Wisconsin, in development in the next 2 years, give or take, that are starting to include a storage aspect to them. And it's not complicated, really. I can say that, but it's not complicated really to add storage onto a project that's already existing. It takes a couple of acres of land, and is relatively low impact. So that stuff is coming. It's exciting to see happen because it solves a ton of problems for the renewable energy industry.
Absolutely. Have you been following the progress? Right now, there is a task force on climate change that Governor Evers has formed and Lieutenant Governor Barnes has been leading. They have recommendations due at the end of October. I'm wondering, have you been following the task force proceedings, and do you see any potential common ground areas for both Democrats and Republicans to get behind?
I have not. No, I have. Obviously, I've seen some lists of what they're talking about. I've watched some of their public hearings. Background on this, I deeply dislike couching renewable energy in purely climate change terms. My whole thing is to try and expand the conversation beyond just climate change.
Okay.
There's a whole list of other things that renewable energy checks off, for both political sides that everybody can agree on. Couching everything in climate change terms just makes it partisan and political again. So that aspect of it, I'm not as excited about. But I think, to the governor's credit, to the administration's credit, they have put together a really comprehensive list of people. I mean, there are a lot of smart people at the table talking about problems and trying to identify some solutions to them. I think the list of identified policies that they have, things that they've been talking about over the last few months, it needed to be talked about in some context in state government. So I hope, I don't know what kind of final report they're going to end up putting out, but I hope that it's pragmatic. And I hope that they can identify some areas of maybe, common ground, even with, the state legislature, could try and identify some things that could move in a bipartisan fashion. That would be awesome. I'll keep my fingers crossed for it.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Is there anything else you wanted to add to close it out? Where can people find you on Twitter, Facebook, etc.?
Yeah. You guys, please just, Google Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum. We've got a Facebook out there, a Facebook page. We've got obviously Twitter as well, fairly active on it. Otherwise, hit our website too. Keep in touch with us through, through our newsletter and listserv and things like that. But otherwise, I just, I know probably everybody listening knows a lot about this stuff. But it's really exciting. I'm very, very excited about it. And I can't tell people enough. I've spent the last year and a half, I've been in every county in the state of Wisconsin, talking to Kiwanis groups, to chambers of commerce, to Rotaries, and, county party meetings. And I've been all over the place talking. And, once you spend 20 minutes really kind of getting into this stuff and telling people, this is happening. This is the changes. These are the changes that are taking place. This is why people get excited about this. I mean, nobody really knows outside of the energy world, right? I mean, we all kind of live in this bubble, maybe in Madison and Milwaukee, the same 200 people, all at the same conferences, and in the energy world. People outside don't spend as much time talking about this, but when you do talk about it, they get really excited. So that's why I think, something like American Wind Week or National Clean Energy Week coming up in September, stuff like that, I think it highlights an emerging industry, and it highlights to other people who don't often spend a lot of time thinking about this, that there is change happening, that, this is an important component of the American economy, of Wisconsin's economy going forward. So, I just encourage folks, everybody listening to this, talk to people about it. I think, there's some genuine excitement once people start to understand a little more about it.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, Scott.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it.
Welcome back to our podcast listeners. I am excited to be joined here by Dairyland Power Cooperative's Brian Rude and Jennifer Shilling. Thank you for joining us, both of you. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to start by asking you both to just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and how you ended up at Dairyland, and then what is your current role?
So I came to Dairyland in the year 2000 as Director of External Member Relations. I had been in the legislature for 17 years and felt I needed to change a pace, and Dairyland was one of the entities in my district, having represented the La Crosse area. So I've spent 20 years at Dairyland, became Vice President of External Member Relations, had broader responsibilities in marketing and communications, publications, and now I'm retiring at the end of August and looking forward to that new turn in my life. But it's been a great career at Dairyland, and certainly a lot of change in the industry and a lot of change in life since that all started.
We are going to miss you. I should mention Brian has been on the Customers First Coalition Board of Directors for almost the entire time you've been at Dairyland, right?
Yeah, I haven't always been the attendee. Nathan Franklin played that role for much of the time, but certainly started from my very first week at Dairyland with going to a Customers First Board meeting and been a longtime supporter of the organization and what it stands for and represents.
Well, Brian, like I said, we are going to miss you, but we are so excited to have Jennifer Shilling joining the Customers First Coalition Board as the Dairyland Power Cooperative representative.
Well, thank you, Kristin. I'm excited to join the board as well and to join Dairyland. I've been at Dairyland since June 1st and have kind of followed Brian as far as legislatively and now here to the government relations team at Dairyland. I come with 20 years of legislative experience, 10 years in the state assembly representing La Crosse, and 10 years representing the 32nd Senate District, which is La Crosse, Vernon, Crawford, and Monroe County. And so for 10 years in the Senate and 5 years, the last 5 years as the Senate Democratic leader. And so very familiar with Dairyland, the cooperative model, the service territory, the 4 states that they have members in, and excited about the new role to lead some of the Wisconsin policy and some of the federal work as well. And so I do have big shoes to fill here on the government relations team, but I'm excited about the issues. I think it's a really exciting time of what is happening in the utility world, the cooperative world. And I like that cooperatives is cooperation among cooperatives. And so I like many of the values. And again, that member-driven focus joining an electrical cooperative.
Absolutely. So just for our listeners who may not know, can you tell us more about Dairyland and your business model? I know you mentioned Dairyland has a pretty big footprint, but how does that relate to some of the other utilities and what you do?
So Dairyland is actually a cooperative of cooperatives. As the distribution co-ops formed across the Midwest in the mid-1930s, they began to realize that until they controlled their own power generation, it was going to be difficult for them to compete economically. So they came together and in 1941 created Dairyland Power as a generation and transmission cooperative. So we only generate and transmit power. We are not the end user connection. We're not the distribution utility. We actually are owned by 24 co-ops in 4 states. 18 of them are in Wisconsin. 3 are in Minnesota, 2 in Iowa, and 1 in Illinois. So we legislatively have to work in 4 different states. We have about 230,000 members, customer member meters, which represents about 600,000 people. So in the co-op world, we're sort of medium-sized compared to investor-owned utilities. We're quite a bit smaller, but we have a capacity of about 988 megawatts and a long tradition of serving those members. We also have a few customers. For example, we serve about 17 municipals who are not owners, but we do provide their energy.
Great, thank you. So can you tell us more about some of Dairyland's recent investments in renewable energy? The theme for our podcast today is focusing on wind power in Wisconsin. And Dairyland Power was suggested because of some of the leadership you've shown on wind energy investment. So I'm interested to hear more about the projects you've been working on, and if we're driving around the state, what projects can we see that Dairyland is invested in?
Well, I think one of the things that is exciting is Dairyland is really responding to members' inquiries and members' desires to look at other ways of providing electricity. And so it is that growth opportunity of solar and wind and those renewable services. And certainly Dairyland has stepped up and is working with partners to provide that with new wind projects. Looking at 233 megawatts of wind that they are providing. In some communities, that's enough to generate, to help 4,800 homes. As you look at others, it's another community of 5,000 homes. So I think that it's, they've got some new ones that they'll be doing. I think one of the newer ones is the Quilt Black Wind Farm in southwestern Wisconsin. And so I think it is one that we are responding to members' desires to look at new sources of clean energy.
And I would just comment that when I came to Dairyland in 2000, we were about 98% coal. We had a hydro facility, which we still own at Ladysmith. And we had just, when I came here, just invested in about a third of one wind turbine located in Minnesota. It was sort of a pilot project. And as Jen has described, we're now at 233 megawatts. We have another project that's on our radar screen that we've committed to, which is another 52 megawatts. So times have changed dramatically. And I think utility scale wind is very popular with Dairyland and other utilities because it can deliver the kinds of megawatt hours that we need as a power provider for a whole region. So we have been investing in wind. As Jen said, a lot of it is driven by our members' desire for us to be more green and carbon restrained. Much of it is driven by cost. The cost of wind power has come down so much that it's actually very competitive. It's in fact now cheaper than coal and natural gas. So wind is really a renewable fuel of choice. That's not to knock solar. Solar has its place and its supporters. It's very good on smaller projects, community-sized projects, residential, local distributed generation projects. But when you're trying to achieve big numbers to meet renewable goals, wind power is where it's at.
That was actually going to be the next question I had for you, which is like, why is wind a good investment right now? And do you see it remaining a good investment in the future?
Wind it's consistent, it's affordable, it's clean, it kind of checks the box as you are looking at some of the reliability issues, but we also need some backup to these fuel sources as well, these energy sources. So I think you can get a kind of bigger bang with wind because the sun isn't always shining, although the wind isn't always blowing, but certainly working with those, with our partners, we found that wind is very attractive and it's growing.
Yeah, and wind, there's no question that the production tax credits at the federal level over the years have helped all renewables become more competitive economically. But I know that at the federal level, the wind producers are ready to see that tax support go away because they've made such achievements in technology and size and scope that I think they feel they can can stand on their own economically. And it is, as I said, wind is a very competitive fuel source these days. And it does have advantages. As Jen said, it's more consistent than solar, although still has its days when it doesn't work. It's also, from a land siting standpoint, siting 5 turbines might be easier than siting 120 acres of new solar projects. Now, there have been some controversies about wind siting. I think occasionally you'll see neighbors that are not excited about it. There are concerns about putting wind in Lake Michigan or along the Mississippi River bluffs, but I think over time we are finding the right locations for wind in the upper Midwest. And some of Dairyland's wind is in Iowa and Minnesota, and that was partly because we have members there, but partly because the wind regime is very good there. And now with our quilt block project, which is the largest wind project we've done, and kind of reignited the large projects in Wisconsin, that quilt block project definitely, takes advantage of a very good, strong place for wind in Wisconsin. And we have found overall broad support in the community there for that project.
I think that is one of the things that caught my attention about that project from the start. Was it seemed like there was a generally positive reception among the community. There's always people who have concerns, and obviously you work to address those concerns. But tell us more about what being a good neighbor means on a utility scale wind project.
Well, I think it's, first of all, working with the landowners, obviously, but neighbors, local governments. Anytime you're going to site a renewable project, you're going to have to engage with the local governments and the county government. And one of the advantages we have is Dairyland is not an owner of renewable projects. And the reason for that is that we are a tax exempt entity because of our federal stature as a co-op. So we can't take advantage of tax credits on renewable projects. So the model we've developed for contemporary renewable projects is to do long-term power purchase agreements. And so we have a partner in that local government outreach. And then as Jen has said, a lot of these people are members as well, because turbines tend to be located in rural America. And those are the folks that tend to be served by rural electric cooperatives. So you're correct. It's not, there's never 100% agreement on any project of any kind. And we just have to try to work with those local people and local governments to talk about the advantages, tax advantages for them, and economic advantages for farmers, advantages for society in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. Wind is a good story to tell, and I think we're seeing more and more that people are accepting of wind. I think solar is going to be a tougher sell to achieve the kinds of numbers we need in solar, because it really does impact a much bigger land area if you do utility scale solar. Now, solar obviously can fit in your backyard, but that'll be an issue going forward, I think, for these larger solar projects.
I do think that the public's position has been evolving over years. I think I remember in the legislature when some of these projects were first announced, it was a lot of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And I think the public, I think business sees the benefits of sustainable energy and lower costs. And I was pleasantly surprised when some projects, when I was in the Senate, popped up in the 32nd and partnerships were happening, and that there was collaboration with the landowners, with business, with government officials, that it just made sense, and it was a win-win-win for everyone. And so I think the public's position has changed on it. Obviously, those that are providing the electricity, providing the power, that we're following the sentiment of the public. And again, I'm pleased that some of that NIMBYism has dissipated over the years, and it's become much more agreeable to move forward with these collaboration partnership projects.
We talked about the economies of scale that make utility scale wind cost effective and beneficial, what role does transmission then play in bringing utility scale renewable resources to customers in Wisconsin?
Well, it's absolutely vital because when you're talking about replacing large power plants, which we are over time doing in Wisconsin, we're retiring coal units. Dairyland has announced retirement of our Genoa coal plant, which has been a workhorse of our fleet for 51 years. You replace those kinds of large resources with equally large wind farms. It's not uncommon to think of 100 or 200 or 300 megawatt wind farms. You can't deliver that energy on the traditional distribution system. It has to be on transmission. And of course, as I said before, because of their nature, wind projects tend to be in rural areas, and the people are not close to the wind farms to use that energy. It has to go somewhere. So we've been really pleased that we've had a partnership with a lot of renewable organizations who understand that if you're going to do dramatic increases in the percentage going to renewable energy, if we as utilities are going to go to 25 and 30 and 50 and perhaps someday 100% carbon free, we are going to need to have transmission to move that renewable energy around and to take it from the rural areas where it's generated and put it in the urban areas where it needs to be consumed. So transmission is very vital. We've been pleased to have partners, as I said, in the renewable community who understand that. And, you know, Senator Shilling mentioned NIMBYism. There's certainly NIMBYism on power lines. I understand that. People don't like them in their backyard or their neighborhood, but they're just a practical fact of life if we're going to enjoy reliable and affordable electricity as we have in our society.
Thanks. Let's transition a little bit. Brian, we mentioned you're retiring. Actually, you're retiring at the end of this month in August of 2020. You've been on our board for so long. Tell us more about your experiences on the board and why Dairyland has been so active in the Customers First Coalition through the years.
So the Customers First group came together actually right before I came to Dairyland. I was still a legislator when California led the experiment of electric deregulation. And many states rushed to adopt that, thinking it was going to be good for consumers. Wisconsin took a more measured approach. Our Public Service Commission outlined a 30-step process, and we started down that path. And some things resulted from it. For example, Focus on Energy, our state energy efficiency program, and ATC, the American Transmission Company. So they were steps toward deregulation, but there were a number of folks in the industry, a unique combination really, municipal electrics, cooperative electrics, and one investor-owned utility, Madison Gas and Electric, that said, you know, we're not ready to buy into this is going to be good for consumers. And so we came together as a coalition to stop Wisconsin from moving too quickly down that route. And it was a great thing because, of course, California imploded, Enron imploded, and all of a sudden everybody realized that deregulation did have major and significant flaws. And over time, we've seen more states re-regulate than we have continued the path towards deregulation. And the problem is with deregulation, there are winners with deregulation, but they're generally large industrial customers, and there are losers, and they're generally residential and agriculture. So like for Dairyland, it was very easy to oppose deregulation because as a system, we're 85% residential and agricultural. Then having lived through that battle, we began to realize that we had a lot in common. And we added the IBEW, the labor union that represents most utilities in Wisconsin, Renew Wisconsin, Citizens Utility Board, had all come in over that deregulation fight. And what we found is by getting together monthly, we could debate and discuss electric utility issues, and generally our group could find consensus. And if we could find consensus, that generally meant that the legislature and or the commission could find consensus. So we've continued that effort. At the core, we're still worried about deregulation and the impacts it would have on residential and agricultural consumers, but we've been able to partner in ways that have really, I think, benefited all of our institutions and the ratepayers in Wisconsin. And we sort of have an uneasy truce with the investor-owned utilities and others who aren't members. They understand where we come from, and they understand that we do try to seek consensus the way I would say, Jen would say, the way the political system used to seek consensus as well.
Well, Brian, again, thank you so much for your leadership through the years. And Jen, we're excited to have you on the board moving forward. Do you have thoughts on the direction that we can go as the Customers First Coalition, and do you see a role for us?
Yeah, for sure. I think what is so attractive is that those allies and the members, the partnership that you have, that we have at Customers First. I mean, it is a diverse group that all have an interest in safe, reliable power and electricity throughout the state. So it's a mix of municipalities, of investor-owned, of the co-ops, of labor, the state association for the co-ops, and so it really is a lot of voices that, and I think legislatively from a policy standpoint, policymakers appreciate when the groups can kind of work out the details on big issues, complicated issues, and then present a unified voice to the legislature on reforms or new ideas and legislation. And so I think Customers First provides a very stable, pragmatic, thoughtful approach to how we deal with energy here, energy policy in Wisconsin moving forward. I think all of those things are really needed at a time when there seems to be a paralysis of partisanship and in what we see day to day sometimes, and to have a long range, thoughtful plan that groups can come together. And yes, we're going to maybe disagree on some of the nitty gritty details. We all know kind of the roles that we play. But I think Customers First is that outlet, no pun intended, of having a strategic, thoughtful, collaborative way to approach these complicated issues and look for a way to do it in a balanced approach.
Perfect, thank you. Well, that's the questions I have for you. Is there any closing thoughts either of you wanted to add?
Well, I think the challenge for Wisconsin is we've enjoyed bipartisan work on energy legislation over the 20 years that I've been at Dairyland. It's one of the few policy areas where it's not distinctly partisan. We see supporters of renewable energy on the far left. We see supporters of renewable energy on the far right. We all agree on the importance of reliability. We might have a different view of how to get there, but we all agree that it's vital that we have reliability. So we actually have enjoyed a pretty good run of having bipartisan cooperation on energy policy. And I can think of many leaders who helped do that, from Representative Coolidge, the current Energy Committee Chair, to Senator Rob Coles, to Mark Conadell and Phil Montgomery and Scott Jensen and a whole bunch of other people who chaired the committees that have tried to work to make it a bipartisan kind of issue. And I hope we can continue that. I hope that energy policy continues to stay as one where people really try to do what's right in all respects in terms of the impact on Wisconsin, and not because of some political agenda, perhaps even from the outside. Deregulation, I think, was a departure from that. It would have been a departure from that. It was being driven by kind of this push of thinking everything should deregulate, railroads, airplanes, and it did work in some areas. But when you talk about basic necessities like water or electricity, there's really a role for good old-fashioned regulation. And I think it's worth reminding people that Wisconsin was the first state in the nation to have a public service commission, created in 1907 as a progressive reform. And, anybody who today attacks the PSC as being, quote, in the pockets of the utilities, or they don't understand the role that the PSC has played for over 100 years. Their role is very much to make good decisions based on the best knowledge in the industry. not to make decisions because of politics. And I think that over time, Republicans and Democrats alike have done that. And commissioners I've known have all been in it for the right reason and have made the decisions they felt were best for the consumers of the state. So I hope Wisconsin will keep our regulatory model. I hope our people will appreciate what the PSC has done, and that we'll keep our system reliable and affordable and safe.
And I think at Dairyland, there's a mindset of being future ready. And I think all of us that are in the utility world have that mindset of being future ready and what that means about how we deliver electricity. But also we're finding that, obviously broadband is an essential service, electricity, utility is an essential service. And so there are new opportunities, new partnerships if you're the middle mile or you're the end mile deliverer of something such as broadband. But it is it's a new exciting time looking at the renewables, looking at connectivity through broadband. And it is that future ready mindset that we come in, we go to work every day and we want to put forward good public policy and work with groups such as Customers First to get there at the end of the day and make sure that we are ready for what tomorrow brings.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kristin.
Well, thank you again to Scott Coenen, Jennifer Shilling, and Brian Rude for joining me for this podcast. And again, thank you to the members of the Customers First Coalition for sponsoring our organization and our podcast. Please subscribe to the Electric Wire wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And you can also rate the podcast and leave a review for us there. You can follow along on Twitter at the Electric Wire. We're tweeting out new episodes here and pictures. And now that we've restarted again, I think it's even more valuable to be following. So make sure you follow us there, and we'll be back in a couple weeks to discuss energy storage issues as we continue our energy innovation series. Thanks for listening.